Hey everybody, and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is John Lunn, aka Johnny Chips, and today we're going to take a look at deploying Terraform code via Azure DevOps pipelines to automate the deployment of our infrastructure into Azure. So stay tuned. So yeah, hi everybody, thanks for tuning in. Today really it's a bit of a continuation of the blog article that I wrote relatively recently around deploying Terraform code to deploy our infrastructure into Azure via an Azure DevOps pipeline. It seemed to gain quite a little bit of popularity with the post within its first day or so. So I thought I'd do a quick video. I'm not going to delve into the nitty-gritty or the detail of each area, but really just so that people can see what I'm doing. I'll work through the blog article and just show how this all pieces together. So the idea is that we want to deploy some infrastructure into an Azure resource group and Azure Subscription, and the mechanism that we're going to use is we're going to define our infrastructure as infrastructure as code using Terraform. We're going to store that Terraform into a Git repository, and we're going to use the trigger of whenever that Git repository is updated, it's going to trigger a pipeline in Azure DevOps to automatically deploy those changes into our Azure subscription. So we're really trying to automate the deployment of infrastructure. So on that note, let's just jump straight on in. So what I'm showing you here is a copy of the blog article in question. I'll put a link in the description below this video so you can take a little look. But fundamentally, I'll quickly run through the concept of this. So we're taking 4 technologies. Now, these technologies don't necessarily have to be these specific technologies. I've just chosen them because I tend to work with them quite often with my customers. There are always slight differences of flavor. So why use GitHub? Well, it's a source code repository. It's there for version control and collaboration on our code. So in other words, I'm not storing it on my local machine. I'm doing my code. I'm putting that somewhere central for others to be able to work on it. Like I said, it doesn't have to be GitHub. In this example, it's going to be. We could use GitLab. We can use Azure repos. There are a number of Git repositories that could be used. Why Azure? Okay, I'm not going to go into that debate now in this video, but let's just assume for the purposes of this demonstration that Azure is a good place to be. As I say here, there are many pros and cons that we don't need to discuss right now, but let's just assume that, yeah, you've chosen Azure and we're going for it. So Terraform, why are we using Terraform? Okay, so again, I'm going to try not to go into the detail too much, but from an infrastructure as code perspective, Terraform today, arguably, again, I'm not going to try not to cause a comment storm, is one of the more prominent technologies that's used as a vendor agnostic component. So in other words, it's it's not tied to one vendor or another when it comes to deploying infrastructure into a particular cloud platform. And in fact, Terraform covers a number of different what they call providers, with Azure Resource Manager, Azure RM being just one provider that we're going to look at today. But you've got providers for AWS, Google Cloud, a number of different providers. I think there's well over 600 if I remember rightly. There's a little link there on the blog that you can take a little look at if you need to. The idea is that Terraform code will enable us to define our infrastructure in the code form that we'll take a quick look at in this video, push that and deploy it into our Azure subscription. So in other words, it's meant to remove that kind of human error, that ability to make mistakes. And of course, if you're doing it in code, you can push it through some form of a workflow, an approval workflow. And of course, it's all auditable, and it's got a verified trail of every action that's been taken on that code. And finally, why are we using Azure DevOps? And it's a good question. I mean, like I say, a lot of my customers are currently using Azure DevOps, so I've got a little bit of experience using that. But equally, Azure DevOps is a suite of technology products. So we've got the concept of boards, repos, which is sort of akin to GitHub. Pipelines is the bit we're going to be focusing on in this video. But of course, there's test plans, there's artifacts. But we're not going to look at these other elements today. We're just going to zone in on the Azure pipelines. But equally, GitHub Actions is becoming more prominent. So this could be configured via GitHub Actions. There are a number of products that could do this CI/CD pipeline functionality. But today's video, we're going to focus on Azure Pipelines. Okay, so we've got those 4 technologies. So we've got GitHub, Azure, Terraform, and Azure DevOps. They're the 4 ingredients that we're going to use to kind of mix together and fundamentally form this. This is our high-level reference architecture, if you like, a little landing zone, which basically, if we look at this, we've got a single subscription. We've got 2 resource groups. The first resource group here is called Johnny Chip's Apo1, and the second one is Johnny Chip's Infra. This second resource group needs to be stood up before we can run our pipeline or run any reasonable Terraform infrastructure as code script or code to deploy this, because the one key concept is when you run Terraform, it keeps its state, so it's able to determine what the script actually needs to do, what it needs to create, what it needs to modify, what it needs to destroy, and it stores that state as a file. Now, if I ran that on my local machine, of course, it would store that state on my local machine. If a partner or a colleague of mine needed to run a script that obviously they don't have access to my local machine, it's going to cause problems. So the idea about this second resource group is purely to create a centralized storage area. So our Terraform state file is going to be stored in that storage account, and we're going to use pipelines. I put the key vault in there just to kind of give a little bit of flavor that there are a number of ways of even accessing it. And by the way, even storing our state file centrally, this is just one option. HashiCorp have their own solution, so there's a thing called Terraform Cloud, which does a similar job. You may opt to look at that, but for the purposes of this demonstration, we are going to store our state file in a storage account within our Azure subscription. Okay, so that being said, the idea is that we're going to run through these. We need these things to hand now. So we need a GitHub repo, which I've got. Check. If I click on my repositories, I've got a repo called Terraform Test Azure. Okay. We need an Azure subscription where we're going to deploy our infrastructure. Check. There's my Azure subscription. We need to create our Terraform code, which I've done. It's in this file. I won't go into the ins and outs of Terraform, but I've stored all of my Terraform code in one main.tf file. There are clearly the way that you can define and architect Terraform code. You can split out all these different attributes into different Terraform files. You can create modules. There's logic you can put into these scripts. I've tried my hardest to keep it as simple as possible in just creating one file so we know where we are. We'll update this in a second with a different key name in there, but I've got my Terraform file created. We also need to define our resource group with our storage account and that key vault. So we need to define this area, and the way we're going to do that is using the Azure command line commands, and I've got those saved in that repo as well under a bash file. So under this bash scripts, we've got all our commands that we need to create that, which we will hopefully quickly run through. We need a DevOps, an Azure DevOps organization. Check. I've got that there. It's called johnnychips.dev. If you browse to dev.azure.com, you can set up your own organization and a project within there. And then finally, we need to create the Azure DevOps pipeline. So we're going to run through that. We're going to create that pipeline within our Terraform testing project, and that's it. So like I say, I'm going to skip over a little bit of this, but so if we hop on over to bash scripts, so I've already pre-logged on and I've set the context of which subscription, because I've got a few subscriptions I've got access to in my tenant. I've set it to my MPN or MSDN subscription. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to set few variables. Okay, so these variables are all going to be used within the following Azure command lines. Before we run them, let me just quickly check. I refresh that. Yeah, I've got no resource group called Johnny Chips Infra. So if I run this command, that should create my resource group. Succeeded. And don't be surprised if it takes a minute or two to show up in your portal, because there is a little bit of a lag behind that. So we'll kick on and create our storage account from this next line. And we go on succeeded, we want to paste our. Paste that in there. So that line now is creating our storage account, and that may take a little minute or so to just create that. Now this next line, whilst that's running, this next line, you can see there I put only used if SPN isn't available. So within Azure DevOps, service principal is that SPN stands for service principal name. So in Azure DevOps, rather than what this script is doing, this particular script is extracting the SAS key from our storage account, and that key could be used by anybody, any human, any machine, any script to access that storage account. So there's a couple of options. Now I'll run this just purely for the sake that it's in there, but we're not actually going to be using it in this demo. So we've extracted our account key into that variable. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a container within my storage account. The container is going to be called tstate, yeah, and we're going to create an account key called the variable state file Terraform state. Okay, so I'm going to run this here, and we can check all of this in a second. Oh, and I've got some incorrect padding. Okay, what's going on there? Okay. I'm going to go without the variable for now, and I'm going to call it okay, right. What I'm going to do then, I don't know why that, I'm sure there's some valid reason, but what I'm going to do then, I am going to use this account key just for the purposes of getting through this part of the code. So basically I'm going to use that long account key to create my key name within my container. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to echo out all of these variables. So yeah, okay, there's clearly a reason it doesn't like that, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this key here, copy that, and then copy that into my backend. I'll explain what this backend is in a second. So there's the last part of the bash script is to create the key vault. So for the purposes of just creating that key vault and storing that key in our key vault, I'm going to create these last two. Okay, I've already deleted it, so that's fine. We'll skip over that, but it's only because I removed that key vault after creating it previous time, so it's soft deleted. So rather than go into removing that and forcibly removing it, there's some bash script in there that we can create a key vault. We can set a key within the key vault with this particular account key, that long number that look, I'm showing you on a video. Obviously, I'm going to be removing all this infrastructure shortly afterwards, but you really want to keep that safe. You don't want to be showing that around to anybody if you can help it. So there we go. So we have set up, if I refresh that now, with a bit of luck, we've got our Johnny Chips Infra resource group, and in there we've got our storage account. And if we scroll down to containers, we've got a container called tstate, and in there we've got nothing created yet because we haven't yet run our Terraform code. Okay, so main.tf. This is the Terraform code that we're going to run, but we're not going to run it from the machine. I could run it locally, but to save a little bit of time on this video, what I'm going to do now is push these changes up to my GitHub repo. So let's just save these files. I'm going to call it update demo, and we're just going to push those. So they are going up to my GitHub repo. So if we go back to the GitHub repo here and go to Terraform Test Azure, you can see I've just typed that update demo. These have just been updated. So these files are now up to date within the repository. Great. So we know where we need to be. Okay, so we're going to jump over into our Azure DevOps project, and we're going to click on pipelines, and we're going to build our first pipeline now. So I'm going to use a classic editor. The reason I'm going to use a classic editor is just for those that aren't that familiar with YAML. It just makes life a little bit easier dragging and dropping the blocks over. It'll give the YAML code that you don't really need to worry about. But in production, strongly advise learn about YAML, because that's going to be the way forward that we can build these things. And they're a very, very powerful tool. But for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to use a classic editor. We're going to select our GitHub repository, and we're going to select the branch. Again, master branch. You wouldn't ever check into the master branch or the main branch in a production environment. You'd obviously want to check into a separate branch and maybe push it through some kind of an approval workflow, and of course do some testing and so on and so forth. This is purely for demonstration purposes. You wouldn't generally or typically, unless you're doing demos or a one-off thing like I'm doing or something personally, you probably wouldn't be checking straight into the main or the master branch. So we've got that selected. We're going to start off, scroll to the bottom, we're going to use an empty pipeline and apply that, and then we get this empty pipeline, which essentially we can choose. So if we look at the pipeline, we can choose the agent version that we want to run. Doesn't really matter for us. Terraform will run on both Windows and a Linux flavor, so we'll just leave it as a Windows agent for now. We can change the name. We'll leave it as Terraform Testing CI. And we've got this thing, so we've just done the source integration. We've got this thing called an agent job, and we can have multiple agent jobs if we want, but we only need the one for the demo for now. We'll call this one Terraform Deploy. Yeah, just so that we can recognize it when it pops up. There's lots of bits and pieces we're not going to dig into on this video, but what we're going to do now is look to build up our series of tasks that we need to do with Terraform. So we can click on add. First thing that we want to do is install Terraform. So if we grab Terraform installer, this one will do. I mean, use latest. Yeah, absolutely. You wouldn't be using latest typically in production. There have been known about things that, if Terraform push out a latest version of the module, it can break previous code, and it's not the best thing to do. So typically you'd version that. You put it down to a version that you want to run against. So for now, latest is fine. We're not really doing anything in production or anything of significance, so we'll just leave it at that. But in reality, you'd probably want to change that version number to whatever your Terraform script, whenever you wrote it, whenever you're going to write it. Maybe limit it to the version that you've written it for, to avoid any of those kind of breaking changes. Okay, the next thing that we want to do from there then will be to run some Terraform's CLI commands. So we will use the Microsoft written module. Some reason I've had a few little niggles with this one, but we'll use the Microsoft written one. I'm going to add 3 in. So we're going to do an initialize in it. We're going to do a plan, and then we're going to do a validate and apply. So we're going to do 3 tasks. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and then we'll just fill in the blanks. So we'll name this one init. We're going to configure our backend, our Azure RM backend configurations. You remember that we had at the top of our Terraform file. So we're going to use our service principal name that I've already pre-created. We're going to use our infra resource group with our storage account ownership state. The container that we created was called tstate, and if you remember, we used that funny long key name. So if I grab that from, where was it? Here. Copy, paste, and that's our first task configured. Next one, we're going to run plan. So this is basically running through to see what changes need to be made and against our state file. So the plan, again, we'll just choose our SPN. That one is now configured, and we will do the final one, which we will change to validate and apply. So we'll call this val and apply, and again use the SPN that I created. Now that's fundamentally created now. We can click on each of these, by the way, and we can take a quick look at that YAML code that gets created behind the scenes. So effectively, a YAML file contains various steps. You can break these out into stages and have, you know, sort of multiple sort of build and kind of release pipelines with multiple stages and multiple jobs. But no, that's getting into a little bit more advanced. So for now, I mean, we'll just stick with this. We will save this pipeline. Now, if you recall, I wanted this pipeline. Now, we could just click on pipelines. We could see we've got our newly created pipeline, no runs. We could click on that and manually run the pipeline there. But what we want to do for the continuous integration, continuous deployment, delivery, whatever stage you're at, we want to try and use that. So if we click back into the pipeline, click on edit and go to triggers, you'll see we've got this little checkbox that we can enable, which allows us to enable continuous integration based upon a specific branch in our repository. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to click on save, and I'm going to go back to pipeline. So now that isn't running, and it won't run unless you manually click it off, or we do something like could maybe just change the name of the tag. So there we go. I've got a tag there called, on our storage account, called Johnny Chips. If I just call that Johnny Chips env. Now I've made a change in my main.tf file. It could be anything in the GitHub repo as it happens, but I'm going to save that. I'm going to commit that. I'm going to call it modify tag, and I'm going to commit that. Now, if I push that to our repo, which I'm doing now, I check our repo and see that my main.tf has just been updated, modify tag. So if I, let's have a look here, go to my pipeline and refresh that, hopefully, there we go. We can see that that's now kicked into a queued state. So we click on it and click through and go to Terraform deploy. We get this nice console view, and hopefully in a second, we should see our tasks pop up. This is the name of our agent job. If you remember, I called it Terraform deploy. You could have multiple jobs running on the same agent host if you wanted to, but this is a simple process of just basically all we're doing is we're spinning up an environment, we're installing the latest version of the Terraform module. Again, you might want to consider which version you want to install in production, which, as you can see, we're going on to that stage now. So we checked out our code, we're installing the latest version of Terraform, we're running the Terraform init, so we're initializing the back end, which is great. We've got a green tick. We're now conducting our plan, which hopefully shouldn't take too long, but that should come back with us. It may flash up on the screen, but we can go back and review these. We can just see it there, 6 to add, before it flicks on to validate and apply. So it's actually now, it's gone through. We briefly saw there, it flash up on the screen that there were 6 things that it wanted to add. We're now actually applying that code. So this is going to take a little bit longer. So whilst we're waiting for that to complete, we could possibly, you can see there, it's now creating our resource group, it's creating the VNet, it's creating the storage account, subnet, the virtual machine. So they're all getting created. So that will take obviously a minute or so just to run through. But if we browse back into our Azure portal, we'll see that we've now got this Johnny Chips app 01, and we can see if I scroll down, I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll just zoom out a little bit, it's a little bit far in. We can see we've already got our VNet created there. Yep. So we could sit here and keep refreshing this, and there we go. We've got more stuff. So we've got our storage account, we've got our VM, we've got our NIC, we've got the disk, and we got our VNet. So do you remember there were 6 things? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the resource group is 6. So that is just going to run through until it gets a flag back to say it's all created and complete. So we will sit and wait for this. But fundamentally, we've now just completed that. So what I'll do, I'll wait for that to complete, and we can have a quick look at the logs from this run. yeah, for now that's run through quite well. Shouldn't take too much longer. That should come back to give us a nice completed sign and a nice big green tick there. And what I think we will do, we'll quickly take a look at the logs and run through actually what's gone on there. So in essence, what you can see is that so far we're sub 3 minutes, and we've effectively deployed a resource group with a VNet, with a VM, with a NIC, and onto a subnet in our Azure portal, which isn't bad going 3 or 4 minutes to do that. I mean, it should be created at any moment now. And that's pretty much it. There's one other thing I'd just like to quickly show you. And there we go. On that note, you can see... Right, so we can see that job now, Terraform deploy, has come back with a nice big green tick. We've already looked in our portal. We've got the items that we expect. We can click on any of these tasks, and we can see apply complete, 6 resources added, no change, no destroyed. So it's finished the validate and apply. And that's great. I mean, that's exactly what you want to see at the end of the day, which is superb. Now, if I go back into, just to prove the point, so if we go back into our, let's pick our storage account, and we can say we've got an environment variable there called Johnny Chips env. Let's make a change. So let's go into our code. Remember, this code is on our local machine. I'm going to call that Johnny Chips env1. Yeah, I'm going to save that file, and I'm going to check the file in. envo1. So there's my commit message, envo1 modified tag. I'm committing, and I'm pushing to my repository. So I go to my repository, I refresh it. We can see I've env modified tag. I go to my pipeline, I refresh that, and we can see we've now got another pipeline, another run of the pipeline. So we click on that, and we click on our deploy job, and exactly the same thing is going to run through. Now, in theory, we should see this run through hopefully a bit quicker. So remember now, this is going to grab that state file from our central location, our storage account in our infra resource group. It's going to do a compare essentially. So I would hope, right, so it's installed the Terraform module there. It's doing that initialization. So it's hooking up, it knows where to pick up that state file. It's now doing a plan. So in a second, it's running through that plan. And there we can see one to change. So we've got plan and apply. Success, the configuration is valid. Now we're going to go on to the apply, which hopefully shouldn't take as long as it did last time, because this is just updating a single attribute, which is that tag name from Johnny Chips env1 to... And there we go. We can see that's all completed. If we go back to our validate and apply and scroll down, we can see we've got one to change. And if we scroll up in our plan, down in our plan even, we can see that the change that it's going to be by this little yellow squiggly line, the environment variable is going from that to that. And if I go back to the pipeline, you can see we can click on runs. We've got 2 nice green ticks for 2 runs, 2 deployments. And if we refresh our storage account, we can see that we've modified our environment variable. So on that note, really do hope you've enjoyed and learned a little bit from that. Like I say, there's lots of things that you can do with Terraform, with DevOps pipelines, that I've purely done this the way that I've done it for education, for demo, just to really understand how you can stick all these components together. Don't forget to check out that blog post. It goes into it in a little bit more detail than I have here in the video. Any questions or comments, please drop them in the YouTube descriptions below. Thanks for watching. I've really enjoyed making this video. I hope you've enjoyed consuming it and watching it. But for now, I've been John Lunn, aka Johnny Chips, and thanks for watching.